it's a meeting between Groucho Marx and Lenny Bruce and a comic and a waitress on a magic night.
And it's an actual night in 1965 when there was a major blackout in New York City.
The whole Northeast, actually.
The whole Northeast?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
See, I'm a New Yorker, so I just think, you know.
I know.
It's New York City.
Be New York centric. Even be Manhattan centric, not even in the boroughs.
It didn't happen to the boroughs. It just
What's happening in Manhattan? Happened downtown in Manhattan. It happened at the diner.
The nearest subway stop to the
It'd be
set.
probably like the 6th train.
You think?
Yeah.
I think so. Maybe the F.
Right.
Well, why don't we let the senior member of the
The old guy.
Yeah.
I play Groucho Marx, and Groucho is an icon, a world famous comic, who on his public side is the king of comedy of his generation. But we discover another side of Groucho, and that makes him an interesting character and a very interesting one to play. And he's in competition with the next generation.
Yeah. I play Lenny Bruce. Lenny was known as Dirty Lenny, the sick comedian. But actually there's a lot more to him than that. What Lenny was doing wasn't dirty so much as it was challenging. He was challenging the social norms of the time. You're coming out of a sort of Eisenhower era conservatism, very buttoned up, man in the gray flannel suit kind of world. And Lenny sort of was a bell ringer. He presaged the really interesting parts of the 60s by about 4 or 5 years. Had Lenny come onto the scene 5 years later, he probably wouldn't have gotten the trouble that he got from the government.
Oh, no doubt.
If he'd come across 5 years earlier, he would have been jailed immediately. But instead, he kind of existed in this netherworld where various legal entities, because of what he was saying, on stage in a public forum that people would pay to see, the authorities didn't like what he was saying, and they hounded him all across the country until finally he was only able to work in San Francisco, and that's where he performed his last 2 performances, if my research is right. He died of a drug overdose about a year after this play takes place, and I actually think, it's my belief, that the system and the powers that be hounded him until they killed him.
Yeah. Squashing his free speech.
Yeah.
America's free speech.
Yeah.
A lot of comedians, though, afterwards that followed in that same vein probably had an easier time because
Oh, no doubt. No doubt.
what Lenny...
He
still has-
paved the way for the majority of the last 30-plus years of comedians.
I mean, you can list them off. Like George Carlin,
Robin
Williams, Bill Hicks, who's
definitely.
a legend. Any of the sort of shocking comedians, even to my embarrassment, Andrew Dice Clay. People who maybe even comedians that I totally disagree with, but who get up there, do their thing, and don't have to fear a public humiliation or arrest.
Well, even like
for
Richard
speaking their
Pryor
mind.
and Eddie Murphy.
Or Red Fox.
Red Fox, yeah. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're white or black. He opened the doors for people to speak what they felt like they could speak in a public forum on politics, on rights, and make it comedy.
It wasn't, with Lenny, it wasn't so much the dirty words, I think, that people were offended by. It was the ideas and the notions and the things he was challenging. Yeah. He was one of the first people to kind of talk about the Kennedy assassination. When everybody has that joke about, it's too soon after a
Lenny
tragedy.
invented too soon.
Lenny's deal was, they say satire is comedy plus time. Lenny took away the element of time. And that's what he prided himself in. He prided himself in this incredible honesty, and I don't think that the culture was necessarily ready for it. Although much of the culture was ready for it. The culture was ahead of the politicians and the powers that be. So.
It was the reason why he was successful.
Yeah,
why people came.
Yeah.
And they loved him or they hated him.
Yeah.
Which is what you want, which is what he wanted.
Well, they wanted to hear these questions. And they really are questions. They're notions and ideas. He wasn't necessarily castigating anybody. He was holding up 2 things of society. He said there's a cardinal giving a sermon in the church, and I've just gone through Spanish Harlem, and the Cardinal's wearing an $8,000 ring. What does that say about us?
Yeah.
He said it much funnier than that.
Yeah.
But that's really, but there's this whole routine, and you can the two main icons are Spanish Harlem and this ring that the Cardinal's wearing. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Why do those? How can those two things coexist in this great democratic society?
Yeah, and how has that changed 40 years later?
Probably not much.
No.
Just now we're willing to laugh at it, but not necessarily do anything about it. You know, it's
Oh.
it's okay to laugh.
No, there's hope you can believe in. Obama.
And Groucho's whole concept of comedy was to make people laugh. You know, not political, not biting, not satirical, but laughter.
And
you know?
getting them out of whatever they were feeling
Right.
in their daily lives,
Right.
which is the opposite of what Lenny was doing.
Right.
Right. Lenny was into exposing what people were doing in their daily lives, and Groucho was about people being able to escape, and that spoke to both their times, actually, I think.
Hence schmucks. To answer your question.
But both of them in their own way were anarchists. You know, they really believed in
Absolutely.
the anarchy of comedy. They believed in the systems. You know, if anarchy is a system, its
Right.
ability to really shake things up and pull the rug out from underneath people. I think
The movie Duck Soup is totally
Anarchic.
Anarchistic.
It's
Anarchic.
yeah, it's anarchic. It's
Say
Antarctic.
that fast.
It's Antarctic.
It is.
very
There's
cold
Eskimos
there.
everywhere.
Anarchy has been melting, however, since global warming
It
started.
confused the whole thing because duck soup was not supposed to be a warm soup; it was supposed to be a cold soup.
But
What were you going to say? You were saying something?
Well, I was just thinking about the two different generations that they come from, and in Groucho's generation, it was a lot of the failures of society were a little more evident because you were in the Great Depression.
Sure.
You know, so there was almost less need to comment on the failures of society because people were feeling them in every aspect of their life. So it was about how do we pull us out of that and find laughter. In Lenny's time, it seemed like it was a little more. Everything was sort of suppressed and kept down. And
Yeah.
There were a lot of failures of society, but they were a lot more suppressed, and nobody dealt with those issues as much because they weren't as evident. And so Lenny approached comedy in a different way.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, well, there's a friend of mine in a documentary play that I wrote. I quote this friend of mine who appears as a character in the play, and he says, you know, everybody says, you know, oh, you shouldn't speak out against things that are wrong. You know, we don't want to hear what's wrong with society. We want to hear what's right with society. He says, well, that's messed up. He actually uses the F word. He says, you know, you don't say what's right with my car.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Take it to a mechanic.
Yeah, what's right with it?
Yeah.
No,
I love my
that's-
car.
No. It's what's wrong with it that you got to deal with.
But
you
that's
know?
like if the evening news shows a kitten was born today. That's the headline. That's fantastic. That's not news, baby. News is what hurts.
So, and then the other characters in the
Yes.
piece, this young guy Ian Alda here represents
lad.
the new generation of young '60s comedians. I guess the Bill Cosbys and the Woody Allens and what other comedians would have? I guess the Smothers Brothers, maybe the emerging.
Yeah,
kind
it was
of,
a different kind of comedy, and I think they both Lenny and okay, so Joe Klein is my character, and I play mostly his comedy probably most closely resembles that of Woody Allen's, his style of comedy. And he's a struggling comic coming up in the in the mid 1960s, and it's he's at a point in the first year or so of his career where he's just bombing constantly, he's just failing constantly, which most comedians do in their
sure.
own careers. Like I was studying a lot of Woody Allen's work and stuff, and he bombed for the first year and a half, just because you have to learn sort of how to deal with it all.
We gotta find your voice,
Yeah,
too.
your material might be in place, but it's all about your essence, how available you are as a person, how much of yourself you're willing to show. And a lot of early comedians don't accomplish that very well, and they wind up bombing even with brilliant material. So he's a fictitious character, Joe Klein, but he resembles a lot of the sort of comedy that Woody Allen represents and comics of his vein. It's not controversial. It's sort of making commentary on sort of the little man as a fish out of water kind of story.
And self-deprecating.
Like, so self-deprecating, basically a man that just doesn't fit into society, and yet he represents every man. You know, it's like society rejects him, and yet he represents how a lot of people feel in society, and so he shows the humor in that. And
Do you know what I think about when we've been rehearsing and stuff like that? Is I think about that moment when I went back to a high school reunion. I won't tell you what number. Over 10, over the 10-year reunion. And I went back to everybody in the class, and we started talking to people. And everybody I talked to in my high school graduating class felt junior and senior year that they were the odd man out. All of the people that I thought were the popular kids, they all felt like they didn't quite fit in. And that's something that's a quality that you bring to it. It's kind of remarkable.
Well, let's talk about our waitress.
It's actually based on a real waitress in 1965, and I've done a lot of work on her.
You did interviews, right?
And I did interviews.
You interviewed her. You found her in the old
I
folks
found
home?
her. I found her in an old folks' home. And, it's a really remarkable story. The whole waitressing in 1965. It was a totally different art than it's
So basically, you left your waitressing job in New York to come here.
I did.
Is the retired waitressing home in Rahway, New Jersey?
Actually, it is. And
Fascinating.
yeah, it is pretty funny. I quit my waitressing job, and
Lunches are terrible, though. Everybody's like standing around trying to serve dinner. Nobody will sit down.
And you're great because we get a chance for the men in the show to show what they think about women.
well, it's kind
And
of
you-
cool being the only chick. I mean, you
Yeah, I
can't
know.
complain.
You have to absorb a lot.
It's true. A lot of, thick skin.
She's the stabilizing force, I'd say,
Oh.
of this whole.
Right.
She's the nicest thing
She
you've
has
ever
the
said
first
to me.
line?
Well,
The
your
last
character
Oh,
is
my
the
character.
stabilizing
Thank
Not
you.
the
Got it.
Mary,
I was like, what
Cast.
happened?
Mary
Good God.
stabilizes everybody, keeps it grounded because you have three comedians with opposing points of view, and she's the only one she's the character that kind of brings it back to. Let's not swear so much, guys. Let's not yell so much.
kind of
Let's
ironic,
not
but-
destroy so much.
And at the same time, I think she's the character who's probably experienced the most real pain in her life, which is revealing.
Well, there's something about putting a woman in this situation with these three, powerful or strong personalities, and that she doesn't buckle.
Right.
She's not impressed. She's not like, ooh, Groucho Marx. She's like, I don't
Right.
care. Like,
Yeah.
whatever. I think you're mean. I give a dirty mouth. I'm bored by you. She doesn't get swallowed by them or by their energy or by their arguments. She can stay on their level. And I think it's also interesting having that one ever-present, female.
Yeah.
And that she kind of represents for each of these men something
Can
different.
you imagine this play without a female? It would be dreadful.
It wouldn't work.
No.
we would have half.
Although
of all
Lenny does have a routine about that. He says, guys in prison, after a couple of years, it doesn't matter. You'll go for the guy in the next cell. He said if the guy's stuck in a desert island, he'll do it with mud.
So I'm pretty much
So
mud.
Mary is
To describe my character, I
In
put
lieu
mud.
in lieu of mud.
And then roll over from the mud. I don't want to cuddle
I
mud.
don't want to cuddle.
The other sort of stabilizing factor, though, for Mary too, not just the fact that she's a female, but she's also what I think a lot of comedians and showbiz people refer to as civilian. She's a civilian, A civilian is those that aren't involved in
The art.
the art of comedy.
You know what's
in
really
this
great
case.
about this
And-
conversation too? We're telling her what her character is all about.
I know. It's totally different tonight.
Why are you even here?
I don't even to be here.
What it means to me, because it's interesting that we, the comedians when they get together, really competitive people.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
And that's really what it is. Is comedians don't get a chance a lot of times to laugh. They rarely sit in an audience of comedians and laugh, because it's they're too busy thinking about their own material and their
stealing the other
Or how
guy's
they would do
material.
material.
and
Yeah.
so, in a subtle way, we can all. I'm finding a way to play off of you and hope that you find me funny because another comedian's probably not going to tell me I am. But how does our material affect a non-comedian, a civilian, and how
A layperson.
Yeah, exactly, a simpleton.
So to speak.
Wow.
Compared to mud, a
mud,
simple.
a simpleton.
We need a
Our first
third one
week he
for a
compared me to a
trifecta.
dog.
But there,
Oh.
I've been trying to find the exact purpose for how you, for my character and what you serve. But you're certainly sort of in some way like the linchpin of the whole thing. I
Yeah.
think,
Thanks,
in a way,
guys.
the stabilizing factor.
And because of a legal stranglehold, I am not allowed to divulge who or what I am in this production. So all I can say is you have to come see it if you want to know why I'm sitting at this table with these folk.
You laugh and you are shocked, I think, and saddened in some ways, and you learn a lot. And that's That's an evening's theater right there.
Yeah, there's a lot of life lessons that are happening, I think, for the audience by coming into the world of this play. It's an emotional roller coaster for us to experience. So I can only imagine what it's like for an audience seeing it for the first time and how it affects them.
There was a woman who came up to me last night, and she was like, I didn't know anything about the Marx Brothers or Lenny Bruce. Like, I had absolutely no, previous knowledge or anything like that. And she was blown away, and actually, she wanted to go watch some movies. And she was like, I had no idea. She was like, honestly, like, okay, I guess I'll go see this show. Heard it's funny. And she was like, I was actually blown away by how much I learned, which, since this is a, fictitious meeting and it actually didn't happen, but, there's still these real people and these real relationships that they've had. You can see it, in how they react with each other. And I think that if we can take this play that is ferociously funny and moving and inspire people still, which I think is kind of amazing, I say rock on.
Yeah, it makes you think. It definitely makes you think.
Well, there's something to be said about the fact that comedians are, this play is built sort of as a meeting between Groucho Marx and Lenny Bruce, and people go to see comedians in their everyday life to escape their own problems a lot, and they want to laugh. They've had enough of their own life's drama. They want to go sit in a room and
It
laugh.
feels good to laugh. It feels good to
Turn
laugh.
on a Marx Brothers movie and laugh. They got the people through the Great Depression, or listen to Lenny Bruce's comedy. Although it is striking at times, a lot of it just makes you laugh. I mean, people go to comedians to find that sort of escape.
But you add
and
that-
it's so
add that to
interesting
theater
that
as
to
well.
then bring people into a theater,
Exactly.
then see these people that make you laugh, and they do make you laugh, and then you realize that they were people too, and that they had problems that they went through, and that they're carrying an enormous weight that is unique because they don't have the same outlets that a lot of people have, where they can just sort of sit and watch a comedian and laugh. They don't
Somebody-
have that.
During a court case, somebody asked Lenny once why he did what he did.
You mean a
and-
judge or a lawyer?
A judge and lots of judges, lots of lawyers, and I can't remember which court case because there were like 19 of them. But he said, I'm paraphrasing, he said, I want people to stop abusing each other. And it was really interesting. It was a really interesting, he became, the deeper he got into the court cases, the further he got away from comedy and the more he got towards social commentary. But I think at the very beginning, he was such a decent person who was using grim and vulgar language to highlight the better angels of our nature. He wanted for people to come to a space like the Wilma Theater, to sit in an audience, to hear a story, to laugh, to cry, to see themselves in what they were hearing, and to leave ready to change something. To leave maybe ready to not get in the fight with the guy who works in the corner store. To leave maybe and not get in an argument with the guy whose car you almost crashed into. He wanted the cruelties of the world to go away because he'd experienced so much of it himself.
It's
And-
almost like that passive forward kind of
Exactly. Well,
ideology.
and it's but for us as performers, not to sort of put anything that we do on a pedestal because we're silly and petty too, but to have that opportunity with an audience through these characters that we're portraying to in fact resurrect these two incredible men, born witness to by these two really phenomenal people and phenomenal actors, I might add. That's an amazing opportunity. And Roy Smiles, who wrote the play, would call himself a recovering comedian or a failed comedian. But he really understands at its essence what it's like to be a guy who people go to for relief. And it's like, well, who doctors the doctor? Who makes the comedian laugh? There's nobody. It's the sad clown syndrome, There's this great joke. Do you know this joke? This guy he's in Italy and he's feeling terrible. He's depressed. He goes to the doctor and he says, "Doctor, I'm feeling terrible. I'm feeling awful. I'm feeling depressed." The doctor says, "Well, here, take this pill." The guy comes back a week later and he says, "I feel even worse. My life is meaningless. It means nothing." And he says, "Well, here, why don't you read this book about getting better?" And the guy goes and reads the book, and he comes back, and he says, "Doctor, the book, it's terrible. I can't do anything. My life is meaningless." The doctor says, "I know what you need to do. There's this great clown Pagliacci. You need to go see Pagliacci. And the guy leans forward and he goes, but doctor, I am Pagliacci. It's that thing,
Well,
yeah.
that's exactly
The loneliest
essence,
life of
though.
the comedian.
The comedians, provide the outlet for people, and yet where do they go? And nobody gets to see that behind-the-scenes look. They come, they have a blast, they laugh, they go home. Haha, wasn't that funny? And the comedian is going home and. He didn't
Getting
laugh
drunk.
that night, I mean, that's portraying it in the worst possible sense, but I mean, it's not to say that every comic's life is that way.
I
But
know. One of the funniest men I've ever met in my entire life is a very good friend of mine. I rarely see him laugh. And if I can make him laugh, I buy myself a cookie because
Right.
I'm just wow, because he'll just make people zinger, and people are just rolling. And he's and you try to zing back at him, and he's like, he just doesn't laugh.
Right.
Well, you guys have to answer that. I don't know. What do you see?
Well, last night's audience, I think, was a really great example, I felt, in that we noticed last night there was patches. Different parts of the audience were resounding with the different comics. And so it sort of spans different generations, which is great. On any given night, you'll hear a certain part of the house tend to laugh more at Groucho, and at other times you'll hear other audience members gravitate more toward Lenny, and it's just and then you even have people that, because a lot of my character's material is so reminiscent of Woody Allen's, that you have yet another generation of people there represented.
But you also have different socio ideologies.
Absolutely,
Following particular comedians by what they have to say.
Yeah.
So it's not just, it's generational, but you also add in their
ideological. It's
beliefs,
a whole combination of, because there's a lot besides comedy. There's also social commentary in this, as well as commentary on just people's personal lives.
I think what makes the two, Lenny and Groucho, so interesting is that they don't mix, that they don't come together.
Oil and water.
Oil and water, but at the same time they care about each other.
That's
and
they can.
It's a very dynamic situation.
I'll tell you, at the end of the day, not to plug anything, but what really makes it work is the Wilma Theater. I've never had as good a group of people to work with in a theatrical setting. And I've never felt like I've had a safer, more fun place to play. This is the first thing that I've done that I feel like it isn't a show, it's a play, because we get here every night and we get to play. And so I think at the end of the day, Roy's script, Yuri's directing, the theater that Blanca and Yuri and the whole staff have put together, and this cast is what makes the Lenny Groucho thing snap.
Well said, aren't we great?
Well, nobody else thinks we are.
the ego of the performer. Good Lord.
How's that for you?
Fabulous.